So this evening we do have a conversation with our very own Robin Gottfried, who is the founder of the Center for Deep Green Faith. Previously the Center for Religion and Environment at the University of the South. Robin is an emeritus professor from that very same University of the South, Sewanee, Tennessee. And so this is actually a book that he has written. I think will lie at the heart of the conversation this evening. Is that right? The Audacious Great Singing School Adventure. So that parable, that fable, that metaphor, that whatever literary name you want to put on it, I guess would be a guiding. I'm guessing, but John, I'm sure Robin, you'll tell us in what way that will be at play as we have this conversation about Christmas light and reflecting on the Incarnation. So with that, Robin, we give it to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jerry. I thought we might just start with a song, but with Zoom, that doesn't work very well unless everybody else mutes. So if you'd be sure you're muted, so you don't get cacophony as opposed to a song. And I thought we might just start with O Come, Emmanuel, just the first verse to put us in the mood. And we'll be talking a lot about music tonight, so it seems to me this is a suitable way to begin. So invite you to join. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Well, thank you. I will read from the book, just a brief background on it. I'm an economist and I don't write fiction and don't write usually anything more than expository prose. And somehow God got me into this. But I've fallen in love with the central character of the book, who I think you'll recognize. It got a different name, but nevertheless, very recognizable. And so I hope you'll find it somewhat the way I did. I didn't start out to do this, and I was just kind of led by the hand as we went along. Now, this is the cover of the book. It's called the Audacious Great Singing School Adventure. And I put in the chat links to it. This is not an advertisement, but if you do want to follow up with it, you can find links there. You can, the best way to go, in my opinion, is the $2.99 ebook on BookLocker. You can get it on Amazon or pretty much anywhere, but $2.99 I like a lot. So any proceeds that I get making me rich off the book, I give to the center. So with that, let me start with and there are little sections here. So the first section is the trio. The story begins with the music. It can't start with once upon a time because time hadn't begun yet. The music, however, had been going on forever. And oh, what music! This music only resembled what we think of when we hear that word. It could transport listeners to places they never knew existed, to totally new planes of existence. The home jazz trio, a bassist, singer, and drummer, had been playing together forever. If there had been a hall, their music would have lit it up, dancing about like sparks off those big old crystal globes that used to hang in ballrooms. If you had been there, you just would have had to jump up and start dancing. Your body would have started to sway, your toe would have started tapping, and soon you'd have been off doing the two-step or whatever struck your fancy. Music moving through you, in you, between you, and those around you. everyone swaying to the rhythm, singing along, swept up in the tidal wave of melody. However, no one but the trio was around. Each member of the trio contributed something unique and vital. If it weren't for the bass player, the one the other two affectionately called Big Bass, there'd have been no music, for the bassist provided the trio with its unending stream of new ideas. It's where the music started. You could even say the bassist was creativity itself. The singer knew big bass so well that he picked up the bassist's ideas with just the slightest change in the bass line and then expressed them, giving them form and substance. When the vocalist sang, you would have suddenly heard ideas that had no words, but that ran far deeper than words can ever express. It would have said what you had always known to be true. Singer made big bass's ideas real. Then there was the drummer. Drummer held the trio together with undulating, pulsating rhythms that just called ideas out of big bass and drove Singer to give them life. Drummer never called attention to herself, delighting rather in animating her colleagues, inspiring them to listen and respond to one another, to work as a tightly knit community that always went where they hadn't gone before. You need to keep in mind that this was music. When you heard it, it was alive. You didn't hear only a good bass line melody and rhythm, all feeding off one another. You heard the song, something far beyond the sum of its parts. Hearing the song, you could almost see three shapes twirling, intertwining, swirling about, responding to each other's movements. The members of the trio in many ways were the weaving in and out of the bass line melody and rhythm, each part in a way formed by its listening and responding to the others. Leaping totally into the mix, they played with abandon, throwing inhibition out of the proverbial arena and responding with endless delight to what they heard. Call and response, shout and amen. Never thinking of themselves, they lived for music and for each other. They were music, alive, passionate, and unendingly moving. If we saw humans so intensely, selflessly interested in others like this, so full of life, we probably would think they were crazy. But that's what the home jazz trio was like. Music never kept to a status quo. If they had been there, hearers who liked easy listening music that stayed unobtrusively in the background would have heard insistent melodies and intrusive percussion that got into their faces and demanded they pay attention. Those addicted to songs with driving rhythms with harsh vocals would have experienced long, flowing melodic lines that called them to profound stillness. The serious intellectual sorts would have been invited to jump up and dance the chicken strut, hopping about to joyful ditty-like melodies. The thing about music is that it never left you alone. It met you where you were and challenged you to go to someplace new. But we're talking as if there were listeners. We've gotten ahead of ourselves. The jam expands. Drummer knew bass very well. He was thinking. Something had to be on his mind. The music was pensive and introspective. So she called out to him, "Hey, what's up? What's on your mind? Let's have it." "Well, I've been thinking. When you and sing a riff, I never know what's coming. That's what makes it so much fun. I'm always surprised. When you come back at me, I get new ideas, new melodies, new sounds. And when I throw a new riff out, bang, you come right back at me with something I never saw coming." "Well, that's true, of course, but it goes both ways," said Drummer. "You always come up with something new that keeps me going." "Hang on." At this point, Singer jumped in. "Everything you say about big bass is true, Drummer, but your beat pulls me out of myself. I can't help but come up with something fresh when I hear you both. It's never the same. That's what music's all about. But we've always been this way, so what's up?" At this point, Big Bass grinned a little and with a twinkle in his eye said, "What would it be like if we added some other instrumentalists to the jam? Wouldn't it be a blast? More surprises, more new material, new harmonies? What do you think?" Singer jumped in. "Think of all the possibilities. We could have infinitely more sounds and rhythms. totally new kinds of music if we had more colleagues to work with. Having 3 players is great, but wouldn't it be marvelous to have billions? Imagine, added drummer excitedly. Just think of all the combinations of sounds we could have. All kinds of melodies and rhythms interlacing and intertwining with one another, playing off one another. What a jam that would be. Let's do it. After eons of animated discussion, Singer introduced a note of caution. You know, we'd better think this through, he said. We have to face the fact that we can't guarantee what the others will come up with. There's no way they can be as tuned in as we are. Isn't it a bit risky? What if they don't reach our standards? To this, Big Bass responded while trying out a new riff. Oh, I know, but isn't that the point? Isn't that what makes it all worthwhile? They contribute what they have to say. If we tell them they have to play the notes we give them and play them our way, what kind of music is that? I want to hear their contribution. That's what makes an adventure worth pursuing. Looking to his right, he noticed Drummer, her eyes closed and her head nodding in agreement as she adjusted to the new riff and listened to Big Bass. He continued, if they always did what we expected and played the way we wanted them to, what kind of music would that be? If they surprise us with what they come up with, that's part of what making music is all about. We might get sour notes, we might not like what we hear, or we might get a soaring riff. If we let them improvise with what we give them, then we have to accept whatever they come up with. That might mean we may have to stretch a bit ourselves. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Risky, yes. But oh, how exciting. At this, the others fell silent a moment and then in unison said, cool. So it started. They decided to have a jam, a music incubator for new musicians. To do this, first they had to have a hall and some musicians. So they invited space, time, matter, and energy into being. Now they had material to work with. Big Bass might think, wouldn't a low rumbling sound be cool? So Singer would call out, is there a rumbler out there? And a supernova would enter the hall. Or he might think, what about a whooshing sound? And Singer would call out and a stream would appear bubbling and whooshing enthusiastically. Once Singer asked if there were a mellow instrumentalist out there, and in wandered an elk, baying for all it was worth. And when Big Bass player mused, wouldn't a clackety-clack sound add a lot to this riff? And Singer yelled out, is there a percussionist out there? Into the hall fluttered a woodpecker. They hadn't expected a woodpecker, but thought it was a marvelous addition. So Home welcomed it into the jam as it had all the others, Drummer quickly sweeping it into the music. And so it went. Night after night, Home played at the heart of a large grouping of musicians whose composition changed over time. It started slow because the new members had to learn the ropes. The music was simple but delightful. Gradually, it grew more complex, multiple rhythms and melodies weaving in and out in varied colors and textures. But through it all, the trio played at the heart of the jam so that, even in the midst of all the learning and growing, the perfection, depth, and joy of the core of the music never changed. Sour notes. One day, while the usual goings-on were going on, Singer turned to the other two and said, you know, this is really cool, but it's just not enough. I wish everyone really listened to one another. Oh, they try for sure, at least some do, but they just don't get it. None of them truly listen, or they listen and don't fully come back at us. Well, you can't actually expect that, can you? Said Big Bass. After all, they're only stuff, energy and matter stuck in space and time. They have to be able to hear us to jam well, and they're all a bit deaf. It's not their fault. It's just that they're not unlimited like us, so what can we expect? Well, I so wish that they could groove like we do, responded Drummer. Get into the zone and let her rip. They're always only part way there. It's like they hear us, but don't. They see us with their eyes half closed. They're not really here. When I play with the two of you, I feel you deep inside and know what you're thinking, and you do the same. But everyone else is just a little way off. They play music, but they don't sing. They want to get close, and yet they can't quite get there. I wish they all could be as tightly in tune with one another and to us as the three of us are, but they're held back by their very nature. I'd really like to be as close to them as they are to each other, but they're not up to that. I'm with you, said Singer. A lot of times they don't even seem to hear us playing at all. They don't even seem to want to play with each other. They'll fight or chase each other out of the hall. We knew it was risky, that things might not develop totally according to our liking, so here we are. It hurts that they hurt. And have you noticed the humans? Now, the humans were the most problematic of them all. They certainly had the most potential. They could do just about anything, make up new songs, dance, sing in parts, even make new instruments. But they didn't have much self-control or discipline. Nor did they seem at times to care much for the others in the jam or, if truth be told, for each other. When it came to chasing each other or other creatures out of the jam, they were really good at it. Furthermore, they were excellent at not listening to the trio. As Big Bass put it, the problem is that they're all stuff. Stuff's off by itself, and in humans, it's run amok. Running musicians out of the hall just isn't our way. After a period of drummer pecking away at the snare drum while Singer hummed to himself, and drummer said softly, well, if the problem is that stuff is off by itself, maybe we need to deal with that. If the others in the jam can't hear or see us very well, maybe they're just too far away, even though we're always right here. A few more minutes passed. Then Big Bass mused, well, if they're too far away and can't reach us, maybe we can close the gap by our going to them. The others straightened up in their seats as they pondered this idea. Silence fell over them as they considered what this meant and what it might entail. All of a sudden, Big Bass exclaimed, what if one of us became stuff? And because we're so tight together, we would be really close to everything. Like, say, if drummer became stuff, Singer and I would be real close to it through her. The jam would hear and see her while she hears and sees us. If they followed her, they would follow us. She could teach them how to hoot or rumble and how to listen to us and to each other. Then we'd all really start to play. That's amazing, said Singer. Wouldn't that be crazy? What a great idea. They'll need some sort of example to follow, some sort of role model to follow, Big Bass mused. We'll have to start with becoming one individual creature who will be our entree into all of stuff, kind of like a beachhead. By having someone they can see, it will be easier to teach them how to listen. Who do you think should go? Asked Singer. Well, drummer put her finger on the problem, offered Big Bass. Maybe it should be her. After all, she's always pulling us together and keeping us in touch with one another. She could provide stuff with the beat and hold them all together. She'd be great at that. To that, drummer responded, that may be true, but you know, I always stay in the background. I'm not out in front. I stay hidden. If I were to go, the others would have a hard time noticing me. That won't work if we're trying to get their attention. I'm afraid I'm not the best for the job. What about you, Big Bass? Why don't you go? He pondered that for a few moments. We need someone with personality, he responded. Someone with pizzazz, a person with a face. I'm the ideas guy. I come up with them and Singer runs with them. If I went, people would think I was running some sort of think tank or something. We need someone who can express what we're trying to do and get it across. A great communicator. What we need is a front man. At that, both he and drummer turned and faced Singer. Singer, you're the one out in front here, said Big Bass. You're the most expressive of us all, always calling out and inviting. You take my ideas and give them shape. That's who you are. Why don't you go? Wouldn't that? No, you'd make a great teacher. Singer responded without hesitating. Wouldn't that be a trip? I could set up a singing school and teach them how to make music that sings. That way they'd have the chance to learn what it's really all about. There was a pause. Finally, drummer pointed out, it's all a bit risky. How so? Said Big Bass. Well, there's no guarantee that Singer will be able to hear us as well as he did before. After all, he'll also be stuff. Oh, I wouldn't worry about that, answered Big Bass. He's Singer. If anyone can pull it off, he can. However, he'll probably have to become some sort of stuff that knows it's something, so that he can communicate with others. Becoming a stone, for instance, might not work so well. Stones are pretty cool, but they don't think a lot, and when they do, they have a hard time getting their ideas across. The creatures that do communicate more easily usually take time to mature. So if he becomes one of them, it may take him a while to realize who he is, that he's part of the trio. We can't expect him to catch on right away. We'll have to be patient. Patience we have, agreed Drummer, and I have confidence in Singer too. But I figured I should at least point out the problem with stuff. After all, we've never done this before. This is a big divide to cross, so who knows? Big Bass paused a moment and then added, there's one more thing. What's that? Asked Singer. Big Bass continued. Given all the way this stuff has been behaving, we don't know how it will react. It's free to do its own thing. Lots of things have been run out of the hall, even though we wished that hadn't happened. That's why we're talking about all this. Suffering and death, unfortunately, have become part of stuff. If Singer becomes stuff, he wouldn't be able to avoid pain, maybe a lot of it, and eventually he'll die. Given the way things are going, Singer could have a pretty rough reception. We don't know exactly what will happen. Because we want stuff to be free to become what it will be, all we can allow ourselves to do is get in there with it and to nudge and encourage. We do know, though, if we stick it out, we'll achieve our goal eventually. No more sour notes. Then we'll finally really jam. At this, Singer put on, I get that. Put in, I get that. I agree. There's risk all around, but it would all be worth it. I'm ready. Then, like before, another moment of silence followed. Then in unison, they all said, yeah. The Great Singing School Adventure. Having decided that Singer should be part of creation, the trio had to decide what kind of matter or stuff it should become, a river or a dolphin, perhaps a platypus or bacterium. Up until now, the trio had played into existence a seemingly infinite number of different types of creatures: rocks, water, air, stars, ants, dinosaurs, beetles, bats, and fungi, to name a few, with unfathomable numbers of each. Home delighted in watching their habits and the way they related to one another. It even rejoiced in those creatures we hardly even notice, like barely visible rotifers or soil fungi. Home delighted in the ordinary day-to-day existence of every creature. Yet home did have a special place in its heart for humans, that most creative and yet disappointing of creatures. So the trio decided on Singer becoming a human because that most problematic of creatures also offered the greatest possibilities. After all, if they could teach humans, they should be able to reach everything. The only trouble was there was one small hitch. Big Bass piped up. We never impose ourselves on anything. We invite, we entice, we cooperate and collaborate, and never force anything to do what we want. We can't just decide for Singer to become a human. Once we do that, humanity changes forever. Humans deserve to be asked. It's the least we can do. The others nodded their heads in agreement. Having played with members of the Jam for a long time, Holmes knew which members the trio could rely on. So Holmes sent a trusted messenger out knocking on doors to ask if someone there would be willing to collaborate with them on making something new, a human who was also part of the trio. Finally, they found a poor, nondescript young woman in a backwater of a subjugated, insignificant nation. When the messenger asked if she would be willing to have the trio father a child to whom she would give birth, she, of all people, said yes. She didn't really know what it meant. What she did know was that at best this was a risky thing for her to agree to. Yet the messenger's invitation stirred deep within her, and her assent poured out, even as she wondered what it was all about. So, true to the trio's down-home nature, when Singer joined the infinite to the finite, he did so through the most everyday means, by being born like all humans, a very ordinary birth in a very ordinary place. As usual with anything involving the trio, though, they made the ordinary extraordinary. The mother and the baby's foster father named him Contigo, which in their language meant with you. He grew up like all the other children in his village, learning a trade in the family business. Contigo was a baker. Home knew that humans had an unusual ability to make it difficult for themselves to hear, to listen to the trio's music. Somehow they always managed to put obstacles in the way. The place where Contigo grew up was no exception. Although humans considered the nation Contigo joined to be insignificant, the trio particularly cared for it because, for generations, this people had attempted to listen to the trio's music and to respond to it. Similarly, the trio had been wooing it for a long time. Music shaped the nation's entire culture and its identity. They were the listeners. However, over time, as humans are wont to do, they formalized and codified listening, playing, composing, and singing, anything having to do with music. The Academy of Music regulated who could make music, how they were to do so, and to what degree various classes of people could listen. Composers had to follow specific patterns and rules, and so had to study for years and adhere to rigorous formulae. Those who wanted to comment on or interpret what they heard had to go to school to learn how to do so. Performers had to adhere to certain styles and play approved music. Ordinary people went to performances and appreciated what they heard to varying degrees, depending upon their own dispositions and whatever instruction they were able to receive. Over time, the listeners split into a number of sects that disagreed strongly with one another, so that they grew increasingly fractious and unruly, despite all their rules and institutions. All this saddened home. The Academy had taken the joy and life out of music, leaving the listeners with the gray, drab version. The listeners had started off so well, but ironically had forgotten how to listen. Now they couldn't even jam with each other, let alone with the trio. Not that there weren't those among them who still could sing, but they had to play alone or on the margin, and that wasn't the trio's way. The argumentative listeners unfortunately had to work all this out while living under a regime that didn't understand or respect them. The builders ruled over the listeners through puppet kings, having conquered them decades ago. The builders excelled at organization and at constructing roads, bridges, and other public works. They highly valued societies that functioned smoothly, just like the construction projects at which they excelled. They didn't understand all the silly, useless fuss about melody and composition, and the listeners chafed under the builders' autocratic and rather humorless rule. As the listeners grew more restless, the builders grew more anxious about maintaining control over these obstreperous people. Only the trio would think this was a great place to start a singing school. That's where Contigo grew up. So that's enough for one night. So I thought what we might do is just start considering what this fable, I like to call it a fable, is saying. What struck you? Anything particularly strike you about the fable, or some thought that comes to mind?
This is Rhodey Streeter. I like the gentle way in. It with lightness and a lot of whimsy,
Hmm.
and it's sort of it's not religioso. It's just sort of like come join the dance kind of.
Uh-huh.
Really like that.
And what does that tell us about kind of, you know, what's the what does that tell us about the trio and what they're about? What do you think?
You don't play alone.
You don't play alone? Great. Hey, that's great. Sure. What else? Kathy?
The more the merrier, and the more diverse, the more possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, are they a serious bunch? What do you
Yes
call
and
the trio?
no.
Serious? How would you describe the trio?
Well, I mean, it is kind of like jazz, which can be
Mhm.
very serious, but it can also be very like in the mood of whatever's happening. And,
Mhm.
I mean, in
Yeah.
fact, now that I think about it, it's kind of a good way of describing the attitude, because it, I mean, it can be incredibly serious, but of course, and but it can also just ride on the riff or whatever.
Sure. Bart, thank you. Oh, Kathy. Bart, you have your hand up.
Yeah, they seem very spontaneous and not and improvisational.
Yeah.
And in the era when everybody was making rules and regulations, they wanted to continue to be spontaneous, but had a very difficult time deciding who was going to go at the emissary.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then they decided to send this kid. But that really separated that individual or that being from the rest of the group.
Mm.
So he had to be a soloist for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he was bred of the spontaneity and the creativity, and I'd even say rebellion
Mm.
that the group had.
Yeah. Thank you, Bart. George?
But at the same time, they were very professional, very aware of what the others were doing,
Mhm.
very, they knew what they wanted. So I think, yes, they were whimsical. Yes, they played, and obviously they were playing jazz. I mean,
Yeah.
what else could they be playing? But I think that there was a professionalism among
Mm.
them that let them, I won't say know the bounds, but they knew how far they wanted to stretch it.
Ah. 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 Thank you. Yes. Is there a word or a couple words that you might be able to use to describe their relationships with one another?
Family in the positive sense.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to go beyond that, how would you characterize a good family then? Joe?
They respected each other. I mean, musicians do greatly respect each other's talents,
Mm-hmm.
and family members respect each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Good. Anything else?
And they listened, Robin.
They listen to one another.
Yeah.
And I think I might add too that they granted each other total freedom,
Yeah.
right? So there was very much this total respect and willingness to listen to the other and let them be and do what they, would do. But then that in turn would change what each person did. So it was just very much this back and forth, back and forth. Um, so
Robin, can I add
yeah,
in fluid? There
yeah,
was a
Bart.
great deal of fluidity.
Yeah, thank you.
Nothing
Yeah.
was written in stone. And I
Mhm.
hate to say that to Moses.
True. True. Yeah, yeah. So given the nature of this trio, why did they decide to bring others in? I mean, it sounded like they had a pretty good thing going, right? Why did they decide to bring others into it? And how was that an outgrowth of who they were, who they are? Joe?
Well, I think they said it. Just imagine if this is good, imagine how much better it could be. I mean, it's just again, like Kathy said it, the more the merrier. I think they
Yeah, more the
understood that.
merrier. So they seem to just delight in interacting, right? Uh, the more interactions they could have, more fun it would be. And so, yeah, I think anybody else have something you want to add to that? Yeah, Roding.
Well, I love the pun on playing. They had a sense of joy about their playing together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that improvisation, but also it has to do also with the listening to each other.
Yeah, yeah. And when you say that, it makes me think they got joy out of each other, right? And listening to what the other had, and that just well, joy, I think, is probably the best word to describe that, and that enthusiasm, right? That just total abandon for each other that I just find amazing. Uh, so. Uh, what is the significance then that Singer decided to become stuff, um, and become created matter and energy? You know, um, decided to become stuff first, and then they had to decide what kind of stuff. So, what was the significance of deciding to just become stuff? Why did they do that? Besides the diversity, liking more, because they started off having the diversity, but then they decided, no, we've got to become part of it. What, Bart?
But they seem to want others to listen. And I'm remembering a phrase in there where they were playing, but nobody was listening.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted others to listen. And one of the cardinal rules is you got to meet people where they're at. And so if we're going to meet them where they're at, we have to be them and
All right.
be like them or perceived to be like them
Yeah,
so we
that's
can be listened
great.
to.
Thank you, Bart. Yes,
Welcome.
very much. Who else? Why? What drove them? And how is this deciding to become part of stuff just kind of part of who they are? How does it make sense that the trio would decide to want to do that? I mean, it's a pretty radical thing to do. Kathy?
Well, since the trio's about relationship, they were wanting to have a relationship with the stuff
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and to
Yeah.
have a, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
they wanted to have wanted to have a relationship with it, because they were having trouble. The other side didn't want to relate very much, so they took the next step. I think, as Bart was saying, get right there with them. Good. What else? Why? What was their motivation for doing it besides wanting that relationship? It strikes me that um, they hurt because creation was, because the other members of the jam were hurting. They wanted them to really be able to experience the unity and the joy that the trio had, but the others weren't getting it, right? They weren't really being part of the jam. They and they kept running others out of the hall and that's not what they really desired for the rest of the members of the jam. So they took the radical steps so that the others could finally really, they hope, listen and be able to have that joy that the trio experiences. Does that make sense? I mean, other perspectives on that? Am I all right on that?
It's
Okay.
useful to me, Robin. Is just your basic, very, very basic premise, which is, I guess, a very big question. What lies at the heart of reality? What lies at the heart of God or creation or the universe or whatever thing you're talking about? What is, what's it all about, Alfie, I guess? And your answer, I mean, you're using music as that. It could have been all sorts of things, right? It could have been books, it could have been words. Word is the thing that John the Gospeler used, right? He used word.
Right.
You're using music. And I guess so you're answering, what did God want that God would do this, which is our very core Christmas question, right?
Right.
Why this Christmas thing? Why this incarnation? And I guess because God wants to share that music. God wants us all singing.
Yeah.
And we were missing out by not singing well, I guess, right? So
Yeah.
maybe that, and it's that the reason that music is useful to me is it's much harder to nail down
Huh.
than rules or performance or morality or right and wrong or any other thing that we could think that lies at the heart of life. It's really poetry that lies at the heart of creation. Anyway, so that's part of the answer. I guess my answer to your question, why God wants that to spill over, is because that's what reality is about, is the music.
Yeah. Why do you think, I'm of course partial to music because I'm a musician, but what is it about music that's different perhaps and then even the spoken word?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's right. Why is that such a great expression of the
Yeah.
heart of the matter, right?
George?
There's so much you can do with music. You can take da, 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 and go da, 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 da. You're doing the same notes. But you're just changing the rhythm to it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you go back to the classical musicians, they still adapted, they still changed, they still played with their own music. And if you get a free-form jazz, you don't even know what's coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife
Mary
was,
writes in
go ahead. Jerry.
chat, music is the language of the soul, which is great and begs the question, why?
Yeah.
It's more fluid.
It's also you can't nail it down,
No,
Mhm.
you can't.
which is, I guess, the virtue in it, right? It keeps us
Yeah.
from ever getting control.
Yeah.
Can't nail it down.
Yeah.
My mom, who was a concert violinist, used to say, I don't play from my head, I play from my heart.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
Okay.
think that's what Mary was getting at there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love Bach because everything begins and ends just perfectly. The structure is there. But then I also love improvisational jazz, and I love what you might refer to as Dixieland jazz.
Mm,
New Orleans jazz, and
yeah.
because it's so spontaneous, and the parts are there, and everybody knows, but you can riff off of everything, and I think people listen to things that are a little bit different, perhaps. So just a thought.
Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, so I think that there's movement in music in a different way than there is in a spoken word, and you're swept along with the with the pattern that comes, and you can either enter it or stay back. But the idea is that there's a movement, kind of
Mm.
a momentum that goes along with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we dance to music, right? There's movement in the music, but then if it really captures us, you have to start moving. Uh, yeah, yeah. So this whole thing, I understand the Aborigines in Australia believe that God sang creation into being.
Yes.
And then the Sufis, of course, for them, correct me if I'm wrong, but and they certainly talk about music enough. And I believe they equate music and God, which is why, dancing and all that is so important because it's a prayer form for them. So somehow, to me, music is this ineffable thing that makes us come alive. And when we say the glory of God as the human being fully alive, you know, it's touching at something there. Um, so yeah, I think so. So this is what God is in. This is what the trio is inviting us into, right? That sort of relational excitement and profound interrelationships that continually challenge us and mold us and make us move in new ways, and always surprising us, which to me is a wildly different understanding of what God is about than typically some white guy up there with a beard, telling you what to do. You know, uh, this sort of God gets me very excited, obviously. So why did the trio then decide of all the different forms of matter that are creatures out there to become a human? Because there was a lot of choice there. We're now finding out that insects even have sentience, could have become an ant, chose to become a human.
How do we know he didn't?
Pardon?
How do we know he didn't?
We don't know that.
We don't
Yeah.
know that.
We don't know that.
All we
Maybe-
know is the story
maybe-
we're telling ourselves.
That's right. I mean, the ants haven't told us their story.
That's right.
Kathy?
It's right. There's another fable out there featuring the ants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So why humans? And our friend John Gotta, of course, likes to point out in the Nicene Creed, these wordsmiths, we're beating up each other over every word. And they said, word became incarnate first, and then became flesh, and then became a human being. So the first idea became part of matter, and then the second idea became a particular kind of matter, which was human. So we've talked about kind of the becoming part of matter part, but why becoming a human as opposed to the ant, as far as we know? What do you think?
Maybe
Right?
the ant couldn't play the bass.
Well, they got 6 legs. I don't know. It might be pretty good at it. Brian?
I saw.
Anybody?
Well, I was going to say that in the story, we have that humans have the kind of the greatest potential. And if you teach the human and the human follows, then you ought to be able to deal with the others too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think? Is that's the story. Uh, what's your take on that? Is it a good decision? Does it make sense?
We're the biggest problem. That's
We're the
what the
biggest
story is.
problem. We were really good at chasing everybody out of the hall and not listening. And so it's
Well,
kind of,
Robin,
Bar-
it was a bigger risk than the Saints starting a backup quarterback. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So what I hear us saying is that kind of two sides to that, right? If they can get to humans, then they can reach everybody else.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's the humans that are sense the biggest problem. Now I'm reminded, Jesus said, I didn't come to treat to the well, I came to heal the sick, right? So it's the sick who need me more than anything. So in a sense, that uh, that to me makes sense of the humans in a sense of the sickest. We can do the most harm in the rest of the world, but at the same time, if we can get them online, look at what they could do. So there's
That
also
begs the
tremendous
question.
hope, right? It's both sides, tremendous hope there. Jerry?
Oh, it just begs the question, what's the healing thing? So if we do go with we're the greatest problem, which is the way that Judeo-Christian storytelling goes, we're the ones that screwed it up, you know. Um, what's the solution?
Mm-hmm.
And so what solution did Contigo bring? What solution did Jesus bring?
Right.
And I would guess that for most every one of us, the way we were raised to think in terms of Christianity, Jesus came to as a workhorse. He came to do a hard thing. He came to slug and to slog and to struggle and to prevail. That's the story we tell. And therefore, and the church follows. Then we fight over details of the Nicene Creed rather than the essence of the music.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of Jesus coming as singer, who says what you really need is music in your heart. That's what you really need. We picture Jesus as what you really need is to straighten up and fly right. And so Jesus came to straighten us up and fly us right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so as far as Christmas is concerned, that's probably worth pondering in Advent season.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you're saying that we're confusing the idea that the singer came to teach us a song rather than to teach us music and how to sing.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I think that's right. Jesus came, the singer came to teach us music theory rather than to dance.
Yeah.
Maybe so.
Yeah. That's good. Bart?
And the the singer came as a change agent to do things that we weren't ready for and didn't all agree with.
Yeah.
And that upset a lot of people. And
Yeah.
he saw how vindictive we can be as a result of that, because he didn't play by the rules. He didn't sing the songs that they wanted to hear,
Mm.
and he
Mm.
didn't hear the music that they liked. So he was a very dissonant chord in the music of the time, and as a result, he was seen as someone who was unhelpful and rebellious to them and their laws and the structure that they had formed, because they didn't get it. They didn't get it. The majority of them didn't get it. And it was threatening to those in power. Jesus was very threatening to those in power. And I think he liked it that way, because he came to upset the apple cart. Okay? And to say, "Hey guys, look at what's going on here." And it became a martyr as a result.
Yeah. See. Roden?
One of the things I always think about Jesus as his sort of maybe as he's the choir director and encouraging people to make mistakes, to have courage, to move
Yeah.
step forward, step into it, be committed, and to that it is, Jesus came for the failures and the people that couldn't carry a tune, and
Yeah, yeah. That's why it's school, right? To help people along, even if they're tone deaf. Uh, you know, thinking about I really like the conversation we're having. I was struck earlier this season in a Revelation, when the Spirit is speaking to the churches. One of the things that the Spirit said, I can't remember to which church it was, somebody there will know, lauding them and all the good things that they've done. Just, one thing after another, done all these good things. But it says, but I have one thing I hold against you. You've lost your first love. You've lost your first love. And that really was the problem the Spirit had with that church. And it was really kind of castigating them. And what is that? And so we're teaching people particular songs, but we're not teaching them how to really sing. And there's a really real difference there. I know when I really sing or really playing an instrument, something happens,
Zone.
And I can remember in high school band, we had an excellent concert band, and we couldn't march with diddly, but put us on the stage, we were really good. And I can remember one time at Christmas, we were playing the Waltz of the Flowers from the Nutcracker, and all of a sudden, the world opened up for me as I was playing. Every time stood still, and something happened there. And to me, that's what music's about. And to me, that's what our first love really is. When we're so in love with God that we don't want to hold anything back, right? No reservation, just like the trio. They gave with abandon. And that's, to me, that's supposed to be our relationship with God and then with one another. Because that's when we're really starting to play music, right? And to me, that's the challenge for us in our church, and particularly in the time we're in now. How can we get people back into singing? In that sense, really falling in love and not worrying so much about what we do, but who we are and how we relate to one another. Joe?
Um, what about the other cultures? What about, other people did learn how to sing,
Mm-hmm.
and Jesus didn't teach them,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And they're still singing. They sang
right.
before he showed up. I mean, that group of people that were kind of had that problem oh yeah, they heard the band for a little while and got away from it, but there were other cultures, right,
Mm-hmm.
over the millennium that are pretty good singers,
Yeah. Yeah.
right, and dancers. And
Yeah.
so so how
What do you do with that?
obviously I'm talking about, the
Sure.
lots of Orientals and lots
Yeah.
of indigenous and lots of,
Oh, yeah.
other cultures that got it. And
Yep. What to me, to answer, and then I'd like to see what Bart has to say there, but of course, that's another part of the book. We're getting ahead of ourselves, all right? But, you know, drummer obviously is the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the one who holds everything together and moves through all things. Um, uh, Jesus had to go back to the Father so that the Holy Spirit could come. And when we realize that time itself is a creature, then time, God is not stuck with time, and so the Holy Spirit's been moving, for a long time in everybody, and people will listen or not listen. And in the book, it just says, particularly this one particular culture had listened, was getting out and then was losing it, but didn't. But there are other cultures that were listening too. So, but the problem that we're facing, I think, as faith communities. I just had a wonderful discussion, a telephone chat with a longtime colleague of mine who's Pakistani, an economist, retired economist, and her office was next door to mine, and we get together and we talk religion and we'd pray together and pray for each other, and I just talked with her and sharing, some of these ideas with her, and she said, well, we have the same problem that so many of my fellows in faith, they think if I pray all the prayers during the day, I've done it. I've done it, equivalent of I went to church on Sunday, I did it. And she said, we misunderstand the idea of jihad. It's gotten kind of robbed. Jihad means inner struggle. We have to really struggle with ourselves to get closer to God. And we aren't struggling. And so, and I have a Buddhist colleague also. I remember years ago was giving a talk to our little group and laying out a very ecological vision. And we were talking about that. And she said, well, but the problem is that most of us aren't following that. She said, even the Buddhists, so we all are in need of learning how to listen again. And there's all kinds of reasons we could talk about that, but that's kind of getting beyond, I think, where we need to go tonight. We all need to listen, and we can all learn from others who have listened
And struggle.
and struggled. Yeah, Bart.
Gee, Robin, you said it all.
Sorry.
What I'm just a couple of things real quick. I think we spend too much time arguing about what we should listen to or what we should play, and everybody wants to solo at the same time. Okay. And
Yeah,
everybody tries to play over everybody else.
yeah,
Okay. And then we got hung up on doing instead of being. And what you were just talking about is something that Mother Stephanie Fox, our priest at St. George's, and I had a talk about on Sunday, because her sermon revolved around being versus doing. And we spend a lot of time doing this, whether I'm serving as a Eucharistic minister or that's great. And so what value am I adding to my experience and the experience of others and to God's experience of me?
yeah,
And so that's a being thing, not a doing thing.
yeah.
And so I can play music, but you don't want to hear it. But the thing, the whole thing comes back to what's the meaning? And that's like, I can walk outside, but I'm really not one with, as Joey would say, in nature, just because I'm outside. I have
Yeah.
to really be there. And that's what we learned from CCC.
Right.
Thank
Right.
you.
That's
Yeah.
the whole thing about the not hearing. Like the music was playing, you just weren't hearing. That's what you're talking about, Bert.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is that? Oh, Kathy?
Well, and also, I think we need to remember to listen to ourselves. Do we really know what we're putting out there in the world?
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. So following up on that, Kathy, so maybe our last little thing to discuss before we hit the rack tonight. What does this tell us about Advent then? How to approach Advent? What's our what are we called to be working on during Advent? What do you think? Kathy?
Well, to stay awake, be alert, keep your oil in the lamps and the trimmed and
What are we looking for
Prepared.
though? What are you watching for? How would you know it if you saw it?
well, I don't know that I personally would. I mean, but that's why, and that's why listening, this is something I don't understand, why people are so determined to decide that the other is a bad thing instead of looking to see what the other is bringing that could maybe be a really wonderful thing.
Mhm.
And so I guess that's what, but I mean, I don't know that I guess I want to have a lamp so I can see and and listen.
Yeah. What does it take to listen? What does it take to really listen? What's it require of us to do that?
Patience
Patience,
and attention.
attention.
Silence.
I'm sorry?
Silence.
Silence,
Yeah, inner silence.
silence,
Mary Weber says presence.
presence. Yeah.
And a willingness to get outside ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I think openness.
Yep.
A lot of letting go of the way I know things ought to be, of what I need to do. And all that's to me, of part of that patience and part of that silence, a real receptivity. But speaking for myself, even when I go outside or if I'm with somebody, if there's defensiveness or being concerned I come across a certain way, then I can't really be open to what the other is saying to me or who they are. And so for me, this Advent, the listening project is really trying to just be open and let go of all those sorts of things. And then I can perhaps hear the music coming from the other person.
It has to do with emptying oneself.
Yes.
I think for a place for Christ to enter.
Yeah. Thank you. That's good. It's good. Well, I think I've had a fruitful night and really talking with everybody. I hope you have too. So I was just going to mention, if you like, of course, you can finish the book, see what happens. But also just point out that there's a discussion manual that goes with it, or a discussion guide you can download for free. I put the links in the beginning of the chat, and there's the third link is the discussion guide. And you can use this. It's set up so that you can have a 1 hour session on the entire book. You can have a 4-session Advent thing, and then a 4-session thing for Lent. You can talk about spiritual. I mean, you can cut and dice it, but and the discussion guide tries to help you. It actually is a structured way to lead each session, and so it's something if you want to use, to explore some of these ideas in a gathering. You can, it's there for you. That's why I wrote it, hoping that maybe people would find it useful. So feel free, get your $3 book, and or email me, and I'll get you one. And then there's that guide. So I hope maybe you might find that helpful in your efforts. Jerry, anything else for the night?
No, folks, blessed Advent. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.
May the peace of the season open your hearts. There's been so much conversation since the election about the challenge of this particular Advent. And so I think music might be a great image to carry with us as an antidote to the doom scrolling and the news obsession.
Yeah.
To say, it's music we're listening for, not politics. Because Jesus, first Advent was loaded with politics. Just, there was doom and gloom all over the place. There was corruption, and the worst forms of government were unfolding in that very first Advent.
Yeah.
So it's not really different.
Bart?
I just wanted to add one thing real quick. At St. George's, we just had our Christmas concert, choir concert, and lessons and carols. And one of the songs that the adult choir sang was, "Let there be peace on earth." And the first line is, "Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me."
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's been going through my head all week. And not somebody else. And nobody here, just me.
Yeah.
Got it. If I
Yeah.
want, and that and the phrase "be the change," because that's what Jesus was. He was
Yeah.
the change.
Yeah. Well,
Thanks.
maybe on that note, we could just end with the song we started with, and that would be inviting God to come, Emmanuel to come be with each of us, and then with each other, and then with our country, and then we can call it a night. Okay. Yeah. So you
Everybody
may want to,
mute.
if you haven't already, you may want to mute. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
We'll listen to Robin, whose
And-
voice is up to the task.
and then sing along. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. When exile here, until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Good night, everybody.
Peace.